Good afternoon. Welcome all. I'm Clayton Rose, the president of the college. I am delighted to welcome back to Bowdoin Frank Shorter. Frank, welcome back. Frank's dedication, resilience, courage, and success on and off the fields and tracks of competition have inspired generations of athletes and non-athletes alike. Frank grew up in Middletown, New York, has a BA from Yale and a JD from the University of Florida School of Law. He is the rare runner who has excelled at the national and international levels at distances ranging from 5K to the marathon. He's won the U.S. National Cross Country Championship 4 times, the 10,000 meter and the marathon at the Pan Am Games, and was the 4-time winner of the Hokuoka, did I get that even close? Okay. Marathon, which was at the time considered the premier marathon in the world. It's fitting that Frank has returned to Bowdoin in an Olympic year. He and his track and field teammates trained on McGee Track just prior to departing for Munich in 1972 for the Summer Games. And it was in Munich, the city in which he was born, and on a world stage in the face and following unspeakable tragedy, that Frank blistered the field at the 1972 marathon and won it by over 2 minutes, and was the first American in 64 years to win the Olympic marathon. More recently, and somewhat less known I suspect, but he's had the courage to share his personal story of abuse as a child, which has been instrumental in leading to greater public awareness of this insidious problem, and he has been helpful to countless families and survivors in dealing with this. Frank has a new memoir, My Marathon, Reflections on a Gold Medal Life, that will be out this July. I was hoping to be able to hold one up to shill for Frank, but as he's a regular contributor to Runner's World magazine, a television commentator, and was the first head of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency and was instrumental in leading to its creation. And as a result of all of that and his great legacy, remains today one of the most influential figures in all of sport. So we are delighted, Frank, to welcome you back to Bowdoin.
Yeah, you know, it's sometimes I've been introduced and the word legend has been used, and that's fine with me as long as the term living is sort of attached. And it really is just wonderful to be back here at Bowdoin. It really is kind of a full circle of sorts, because if you really think about it, when I think Coach Sebastianski, Sab, and always there's a personality who drives anything that happened, like when they brought the Olympic marathon team here in 1972, that I didn't realize that all these years later I could be coming back here and sort of reporting on what's happened to me in between. And so with that, I'm going to ask the IT people to just play a little bit of the Munich Marathon race, because I think it's a pretty good introduction to it, because if you think about it, 43 years and 10 months ago, I was here right before this happened. So I just thought it might be fun to just watch it for a couple minutes.
September 10th, 1972, the Munich Olympic Stadium. 71 runners gather for the start of the marathon race. Mama Wolde, age 40, will try to duplicate Abebe Bikila's feat of 2 successive Olympic victories. The Munich Olympic Committee has invited Abebe to witness the attempt. Mamo is not the favorite. Ron Hill of Great Britain, a veteran of the Tokyo and Mexico
See, the music demonstrates how at that time the marathon was really viewed as a true survival contest. It was like you start and sort of last person standing wins, and the thing that I decided to do in this race was to actually make it a track race. So I took off at 9 miles, and no one had ever really done that before.
Gaston Rollins of Belgium, the 3,000-meter steeplechase winner in Tokyo, moves into 6th place. Clayton's pace has been exhausting. He slows it down.
Okay, drama coming up here. But just as with Joni's race in LA, and I was there, I was riding on the truck in front, when she took off in front of Ingrid Christensen and Greta Weitz, I said to myself, they're making a big mistake.
Followed by Mamo Wolde, Ethiopia, and Carol Lismont, Belgium. They are more than a minute in back of Shorter, some 400 meters behind. Shorter moves relentlessly on. At 35 kilometers, he increases his lead to almost 2 minutes. Shorter is all alone. With each stride, he increases his lead.
There we go. There's the drama.
9 runners have fallen exhausted to the pavement. 2 have to be hospitalized.
But you see, at this point, no one expected an American to do this, because we were sprinters, but we weren't endurance athletes. That was the domain of runners from other countries. And so part of the big satisfaction for me was to, in essence, showing that Americans really could endure, and we could train to do this. Now, what they don't show here is that there was an imposter on the track who came in and took the roar away. Actually, when I came on, it was
Shorter's
silent.
Time, 2 hours, 12 minutes, 19 and 8/10 seconds. He is the first United States marathon winner since Johnny Hayes' victory in 1908.
There we go.
In second position, Carol Lismont, Belgium. Mamo Wolde,
That was
Ethiopia,
Carol Lismont in
third.
second, and Mama Wolde.
Frank Shorter looks forward to the
Okay,
Montreal Olympic
they can-
Games in 1976, when he will attempt to duplicate Bibi Bikila's record of 2 successive marathon gold medals.
Yeah, and okay, you can turn that off. Thanks. You know, I think the reason to look back on that was when I was here in July of 1972, and I just happened to walk out of the hotel and walk across the street, and there was the dorm. I think it was Main Hall, where I stayed when I was here. And as I said, Coach Sab had arranged, I think, for the American team to come here, and this was where all of us who were in that 1972 Olympics got together as a team and got to do things as a team. The other parallels, and I will get into my topic here of, telling you what I want to tell you, but there are stories, because when I was here, they also threw a big lobster cookout for us. And it was on, and Joni can help me out here, it was out on the water, and was it Davies or Daly? There was a doctor. Bailey, Dr. Bailey. Hammond, okay, we'll get it. And they had a dock, and of course, I've qualified for the Olympic team, right? And so I'm out there at the lobster bake. Well, I have to show off a little, because I kind of know how to water ski, and your water was very cold. So I decided to take off from the dock on a single ski. So I would jump off, and then when I finished, I would ski to the dock and sit on the dock. Okay, I didn't go down in the water, of course, because the Olympics were coming up and had to be safe. But, it's amazing how your mind works there. And again, just to fast forward, when the terrorist attack came in the Olympics, I was sleeping on the balcony on a mattress because my roommate Dave Waddle had just brought his new wife in to share our room, and there wasn't room for me. At least I don't think I was welcome. And, and, and so I heard the shots. I heard the shots, and it was 4 in the morning. And again, just to fast forward, because I'm allowed to free associate because they invited me and I can do this. When you talk about full circles, which I'll then get into, in Boston 3 years ago, I was walking down the street to a production meeting at, 2:50 in the afternoon? I think that's the time. And I was right in front of the Lord & Taylor, and couldn't get to the finish line, so I went into the vestibule of Lord & Taylor, and I heard the bomb. First one, and then I got inside knowing people were going to be coming in behind me, and the second bomb went off right behind me. So I'm probably one of the few people, when you think about, again, these full circles, that heard the shots in Munich and the bombs in Boston. So when you start to wonder why things happen, you know, it does. But I do want to bring it around as to, you know, why I'm here. And this has Joni Samuelson written all over it. You know, as you know, Joni's on your board of trustees, and when I think she talked to the selection committee about whom they might think about to honor, my name came up. And to bring it back to the finish in Munich, and why I kind of wanted to show the finish in the stadium, was that, you know, when I was winning the Olympic marathon, and I'm going down the tunnel, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to hit the track now, and there's going to be this big cheer. And I get out onto the track, and it's silent. A young high school student had put on a fake uniform and made up a number, and his buddy had been driving a golf cart servicing the pop stands around the stadium for the entire track venue time, 2 weeks. So he just hopped on the golf cart, and his timing was impeccable. He jumped off, ran into the tunnel, big cheer went on. I was outside running on the, and I hear this big cheer, and at that time it was the last event in the track and field games. It was the last event in the last day of track and field. And so I thought, you know, we have this bias, we runners against the field event men. I thought, you know, these high jumpers and pole vaulters, they take all this time. And you know, things were running late, and someone must have made a high jump, and there was a cheer. So I'm waiting, I get out on the track, it's silent. It's silent when I came out on the track. That's why there's no clip of me coming onto the track, it's only after. And I thought to myself, which is why I talked about during the race, I said, geez, I'm an American, but give me a break. You know, I have run, you know, I ran the whole way, honest. And then the whistle started, which, as you know, in Europe, whistling is booing. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what's going on here? I get on the backstretch, and it's silent again. People are just trying to figure out what's going on, and this voice, this American accent, Midwestern accent, calls out, "Don't worry, Frank." And I think to myself, why should I worry? I'm ahead. And so it was right after I finished, and someone came up to me and said, well, what'd you think about that guy? And I knew right away. But what I found out from that, and again, it's interesting how those things happen, is that I found out that over time, people who saw that and then heard it were much more upset than I've ever been about it. It never really bothered me. And to me, that indicates, you know, I think it's a pretty good indication of why I was trying to do well in this race, and it wasn't for that cheer at the end. And so I've always sort of kept that with me. And so when I left Bowdoin after training here to go over to Munich, what it was sort of where I was going to truly find out something. And this had to do with the fact of where I'd come from, how I'd been educated, as you've heard, and why someone who was a Ivy League pre-med student would end up on an Olympic podium, and how that would happen, how that change would take place. And I thought it was really relevant to what's going on here as graduation weekend, because as I thought about how I would try to frame my talk today, I realized that, you see, the education for me provided a certain foundation and way of thinking and a way of approaching things, and in particular, reframing situations that contributed to my being able to approach my getting ready for and competing in the Olympic Games. My education played a huge role. And I think in this day and age, we do lose track of the fact. I mean, in many instances, we're just trying to make sure the athletes we have are actually taking the exams. And so I think, as I try to relate to you just how I think this happened, I was brought up, as President Rose said, in a small town in upstate New York, in the Hudson River Valley, and I came from a very, very abusive background. It's as horrific as you might imagine. It included all of the above. There were 9 siblings. It was a savior doctor by day, Jekyll and Hyde, awful situation at home. But I was very, very lucky in that I began to find people in the same way I learned to do in prep school at Northfield Mount Hermon and then at Yale. I looked for mentors. I looked for normalcy. I looked for situations that to me seemed normal and right. And a big part of that was my surrogate mother, who was a Boston Brahmin, who happened to marry my best friend's father. He was a Yale-educated doctor, and they lived in my tiny hometown. And she brought in a Harvard-educated school superintendent who created one of the early TAG programs, talent and gifted programs in the United States. And I got involved in that program. And again, the academics being part of the escape from where I found myself. I had this instinct, I think, from a very early age that would be my, in a sense, way out. My survival would come through that. And so that started that process for me. And so in a sense, my ending up on the podium in Munich was more serendipity than plan, athletic plan from the start. Because the other thing I discovered, and again, what I wanted to talk to as many of the graduates and students here that I can meet as possible, is that I also found that in addition to the academic part of what I like to do, and I viewed that really as primarily my way of escape, that I found I simply loved to run. And I started to do it for stress relief. I began when I was about 10 years old. Don't ask me why. I started running to and from school. And it was about 2.5 miles, and I found out I liked it. And I must have been very persuasive, because at the time, you had to wear black tie shoes to school. There was a dress code, no loafers, no nothing. I convinced my middle school principal to allow me to wear some low-cut sneakers I'd found and modified to run to school. In gym class, I'm 11 years old. I convinced the gym teacher to allow me to run laps around the field during gym class rather than do gym. You know, so I must have had some sort of instinct for it, but I also must have been very persuasive. But those of you who are teachers also know they probably just thought, oh, we'll get over it. You know, he'll get tired of it. And so, you know, what I'm trying to draw is this picture of someone who is coming up in a totally goal-oriented academic environment, who along the way, because of his background, in a sense, for stress relief, starts to run, and then finds out he just loves to do it. Never competed, I enjoyed the feeling. And so then I go off to Northfield Mount Hermon, which is a prep school, very, very wonderful prep school, perfect for me. I love the sense of equality and inclusion. For those of you who don't know, Northfield Mount Hermon has a tradition of 10 hours a week. Every athlete, every person there has to work 10 hours a week, whether you're from Park Avenue in New York or the Mississippi Delta. And so I started out on the dish crew feeding a dishwasher for 500 people and, worked my way up. But I also, in a sense, lucked out because it turned out Mount Hermon also had a tradition for running, and I had no idea. I had no idea they did. So I found the running, I found the social aspect of it, and I found the success. I was just very, very good at it. And by the time I was a senior there, I was doing obviously well enough to be admitted to Yale, but I was also an undefeated cross-country runner and set a course record in every course I ran in New England, and I loved setting the Exeter course record and the Andover course record. And so, again, what I'm trying to point out is this was my background, and I was coming up the standard way of success that I think still operates today, although there are many, many more themes and variations on how you can do this. And in my era, as they say in my era, there were only certain ways to go once you got to college. But I did do that. And so, again, feeling that this is a graduation weekend, that I come to the end of my Yale career, and I've done well enough to be admitted to med school, and I'm going to start in med school. And I was using my running mainly as stress relief. It was my time when I got all my work done in college. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd get on the bus and go out to the athletic facilities and work out for an hour and a half, 2 hours, come back, and then get back to the grind. And it was my reward. And so I was all set. I was all set to simply graduate and go to med school. The only thing that got in the way was I had this propensity to do things early, and I was ready to graduate by spring break of my senior year, so I started running twice a day. Joni will talk about this, and that's why I love being here with Joni, is that I know she went through the same thing. She went through that same sort of phase where she began to realize that what she was doing for recreation and stress relief, she was really pretty good at it. She was pretty good at it. And so I got all my requirements done. I started running twice a day, and long story short, by 3 months later, I was the national champion at 6 miles and runner-up at 3 miles. And again, just as, Yale guys don't end up on the podium in Munich, guys from Yale don't win NCAA long-distance running championships. They just don't. And so I started to have some, what the psychologists call cognitive dissonance. The idea of, okay, I am proceeding in this way because this is, in a sense, what's socially expected from me, and yet I'm finding out I'm really good at this. And I hope not from an egotistical way. It's just like I was discovering, my gosh, I'm just getting better and better at this. And so really the message that I sort of wanted to bring here for all of you and any of the students that I meet here is that I truly made a decision after I had started med school that, you know what, I was just going to find out. And the way I put it now is I wasn't going to have what I call the if-onlys. Well, if only, oh, what if? I wonder how it would have turned out. Because I was on this upward curve. And I just decided I was going to see where it led. So, and I'm not telling all the graduates here to drop out of graduate school, but I'm saying is, I think the foundation that was laid when I was in an academic environment where I could see all sorts of expertise and ability around me, not only in the professors and in the courses, but in the other students. I know it's the same way here, that my fondest intellectual memories are of sitting at the dining table with all my friends, most of whom had other majors, other interests and other abilities. And I began to, in a sense, truly realize what I was good at. I knew where I stood on the, on sort of the rankings, and I'll get into that at the end. But I just realized, I think I will give it a couple years and find out. And at the time, you didn't do this. And so I did. So I ended up on the podium in Munich. And then, again, I want to, again, speak to the young people there. Then the decision was, okay, where do I go from here? What do I do? Well, while I was training for Munich, I got back into what I wanted to talk to, again, a lot of the students, and I think a lot of people here, the idea of, as you decide how you're going to approach goals and do certain things. Until I was at the end of my college years, the academics came first and the athletics were second. And what I learned, though, was, for me, that was a very, very good way to accomplish more in either field. And I learned very early on, and what I wanted to talk to the young people here again about was what I call turning the switch on and turning the switch off. I realized that what I was doing for stress relief was absolutely great. And I developed this pattern, which I maintain to this day, of being able to, some people call it compartmentalize, to go on, to go off, focus in one area, not in another. So when I dropped out of med school and started to train, I realized I was bored, so I went to law school. And so I went to law school full-time and trained for the Olympics. I ran 20 miles a day and went to law school full-time. But I found that was my pattern of activity that worked. You see, that worked for me. I learned this combination worked for me. And I guess the way I would put it is, I'm not a monomaniac. And I think the misperception is you have to be a monomaniac and totally absorbed all the time. Because the other message I wanted to send, and Joni will back me up on this, is that the one thing you learn, and I think the nice thing about being in an academic environment like Bowdoin, like Yale, where I came from, is that you do realize that you don't get it all right all the time. It's called a grade. And from an academic standpoint, what you can consider it is, if you think about it, once you get to the highest level of any area, in a sense, you most likely fail more than you win. And this is something that I think is most apparent in Joni's and my discipline. Whenever I am with a group of Olympic medalists on the stage, if I bring up the fact and say, yep, we all lost more than we won, every head goes like this. Every head goes like this. And so what you learn, and what I learned through academics, was to peak, in essence, to be ready at the right time, to be ready when it matters, to be ready when the exam comes. It's the same mental process, and along the way you go through this intense activity and then rest from it. Rod Dixon, one of our contemporaries, has put it best when he says, I improve when I'm resting. I don't improve when I'm going hard. And I think that's, again, the thing that maybe people have to maybe remember and reconsider. So I took all of that, and I'm on the victory stand. I said, what do I do now? Do I go back to the normal American way of doing things? I didn't want to. I like to run. And so I decided to finish law school, train for another Olympics, went back to the Montreal Olympics, won the Olympic trials again, and found myself in a race where there was someone in it wearing a white uniform with no markings from any particular country. I used the same strategy I'd used in the Munich race, took off, and this person went with me, stayed with me, and then at about 20 miles going through the University of Montreal, just pulled away like the race had just started. I had no idea who it was. I had seen a runner, and it shows, I don't know if I've ever told Joni about this. I had seen a runner who finished second to La Severin in the 10,000 meters named Carlos Lopes from Portugal, and I thought, and I said in commentary on TV, I said, this guy would make a great marathoner, to Eric Siegel, who was doing the commentary with me. And so I spent the whole race thinking this guy was Carlos Lopes. And so he goes on and pulls away from me with about 5 kilometers to go. I'm coming back on him slowly. I get about 50 meters behind him. He turns around and looks at me and takes off as if I was, you know. And it turns out I got done the race, and he actually ran a lap extra. And don't ask me why. Don't ask me what the reason might be. And so I finished, and he walked up to me and he said, "Sprechen Sie Deutsch?" And I thought, that's weird for someone from Portugal to ask me if I speak German. And it turns out he was a man named Waldemar Cierpinski, and he was on the East German team. And I won't go into details on that, but it brings up something, and the reason I bring it up is that the other point I wanted to get across, particularly in this sort of environment of graduation, you know, when you decide, what are you going to do after this? Well, I decided that I would stay in the sport, and I found people, and at that time there was no way to earn a living in the sport. In fact, Steve Prefontaine, my great friend who died young in 1975, I was the last person to see him alive, and we were actually discussing this topic just before he drove around the corner and died. And we all decided we were going to work to try to open up the sport to prize money. And before that, I had also, I think, used my education and a way of approaching things and setting goals and dealing with people that, again, I'd learned through my education. And the fact that something I didn't bring up, I've always been my own sort of self-starter and instigator, initiator. It's a good slip. That in an academic sense, when I was in college, learned how to train myself, and I coached myself. In fact, my coach at Yale, Bob Giegengag, said by the middle of my junior year, I was making up my own workouts. Okay, so I think I took that sort of attitude, but I got to do an aside. I got plenty of time. That the other parallel I love is that Coach Sab and my coach at Yale, Robert Giegengag, were the same kind of coaches. They couldn't run a lick, but they were extremely bright men and tremendous organizers, and the one parallel was they were smokers. Sab was a cigar smoker, and my coach was a cigarette smoker, and Joni and I got to talk about that. And here's our cross-country practice. We go out, there's a field that's about a mile around. We run interval miles around this field. Coach Giegengag would sit there, I remember, in his Oldsmobile Toronado with the window up, smoking, and then let the window down to give us our splits as we came by, and the smoke would come out the... And in the same way, Coach Sab would, you know, go along the road and smoke his cigar and make sure everybody ran the entire way, you know, and you know those lovely memories and parallels. But I think what I did get into was this rhythm of trying to use the success that I had on the Olympic podium and the notoriety I had in recognition in a way that could get some things done. And not be for my own personal aggrandizement. And so what really happened is those of us got together, and in short, some of us in Boulder and then some people out in Oregon and an athletes group, we actually came up with an idea of opening up track and field to prize money. And it was an idea called the Trust Fund that I actually came up because guess what? You know, us guys, we don't read anything. I read Rule 52 of the IOC rules, and it allowed for national federation Olympic Committee trust. Long story short, we worked through the U.S. Athletic Federation and created this trust fund that allowed the sport to open up. It was just a wedge in the door in that we knew the Eastern Europeans were giving their athletes money and supporting them. Our argument was, we create a trust fund, the athlete runs for money, it goes into the fund, they get it out on a schedule that is the equivalent of what we know the Eastern Europeans are getting, and when they retire, they can have the corpus, the rest of the trust. And as I found out in all of these kinds of situations, and later on with USADA and the drug issue, very often people are looking for a solution to a problem. They have a problem. International Track and Field realized they had a real problem with the Eastern Europeans. So they bought the idea, and guess what? I don't think anyone's trust fund was ever audited. They just wanted a solution. And they started the solution, and it devolved. But the other point I wanted to make there is that, and especially to the young people, these situations in which I became involved after my success and how I realized or wanted to leverage my success took time, and they took patience, and they took being willing to prepare to wait for what I call the window. In other words, trust fund came out in 1981 because this window emerged with this problem. I finished second in the Olympic Marathon in 1976. I don't say anything for 22 years. Okay? So fast forward to 1998, where in the drug era it's becoming more and more apparent what's going on. And I just decide, I read that the wall came down in Germany, so they had all the records, and I got a hold of some records through a fellow named Werner Franke, who's a doctor by trade, but an investigator by desire. And there's documentary evidence of the East German doping program. And I did that on my own initiative in 1998, so I knew. I had documentary evidence, which I won't go into, and I didn't say anything. Then, 10 months later, the Festina scandal in cycling happens, and the International Olympic Committee has finally decided they're going to try to pretend they're doing something about the drug issue. They're going to have a conference to pretend to deal with it, and everyone will go home. And it turns out that the White House decided they were going to attend this meeting and inform the IOC that they were out of the drug testing business. And I linked up with the White House, and the net result was I became the first chairman of U.S. anti-doping. I went to that meeting, I represented the athletes, I called for the change. The IOC wasn't going to do anything. Anyone who wants to know the real inside story of how we did that with an organization that is answerable to no one on earth, not even the Russians, we got it done. And so I waited for that window. I think that's the important point to make here. I waited for that window. I waited all those years, and in all those years, I wasn't like I was simmering. I was just ready, just in case, and always interested. And so the net result of that was U.S. anti-doping. And to bring it up, and then I'll close it off in terms of, again, because the lesson or the point I wanted to make with regard to athletes is, or students, is that, very often you can have a passion and a goal, and you can always be working towards it, waiting. And you can have incremental goals along the way, and you can have your favorite goals and your passions. And if you're patient, sometimes things come around, which, as we've seen very recently with the Russian team, problems that they're having, that you really can have results. And I want to make one other point there, in that even there, it's been 16 years since the formation of U.S. anti-doping, and where we are obviously today, where the IOC finally is coming out and saying, in essence, We have to separate out the conflict of interest inherent in this system so that the people promoting the sports cannot be policing it. That has been the way USADA has been set up right from the start. I know because I wrote the memoranda that became the structure of the agency. And finally, the IOC is saying, guess what? We have to, in essence, have every national drug testing agency be like USADA. And the model's been there for 16 years, okay? So I think if we're all lucky, that's going to be the net result. But finally, you know, what I'd like to, and this is very personal, and again, it speaks to sort of where you go from college and graduation and how you try to have an impact, you know, on your world, on your culture. Again, I went, you know, Bowdoin is the same. I went to Yale. My roommate, the term sharpest tool in the shed. I only had to look across the room to know who was the smartest guy in the room. And the way I put it, he was a normal genius. And we were both pre-meds, both had the same academic schedule. He did better than I did, but he was very humble, and in fact, he never told me that he was junior year Phi Beta Kappa. And we had the same, and I guess the way I'm trying to put it is, he graduated, then graduated first in his class in med school, went to Stanford on an internship and residency in psychiatry they created for him so he'd go there, came back, was one of the first to do research in the chemical treatment of schizophrenia. He and his wife, Bonnie, did clinical trials and owned the drug Reminil for 20 years. His name is Ken Davis, and he's head of all Mount Sinai in New York City. Dr. Ken Davis. That was my roommate. And one time, years ago, he was talking to me, and he said, you know, I can't think of anyone who's done more for the health of the country in a way that you have. And, you know, for me, that was kind of one of the most, you know, rewarding things I've ever heard. Because just as in the Munich race where I came into the stadium and wasn't expecting the roar, I didn't expect my winning this race to have the kind of impact that it had. And so over the years, it's always been very, very enjoyable to me to find out that there are all these people who love the same thing that I do, and that there's so many more of them. And so, you know, that's kind of how I want to close it out, at least before the questions here, is that, and again, because this is a graduation situation, really don't be afraid to find out. You know, don't let the what ifs ever haunt you. Is that, you know, you can have two guys from the same room in college go off, I think, and do very, very significant things in totally disparate areas. And that's the beauty of education. And that's the beauty of the experience. And you just have to be, in a way, willing to follow your feelings and instincts and let it happen. So with that, I thank you for letting me be here, and I would love to answer some questions. Thank you. Oh, yeah, I just wanted to make sure I didn't mention Reminil for those of you who aren't familiar with Alzheimer's medications. It was one of the first Alzheimer's retarding medications. Yeah, the question. Go ahead.
What's going to happen with Russia and... What's going to happen with Russia and East Germany in the Olympics this year?
Well, Russia's... On the 17th, they're going to find out. They've tested a bunch of samples now from Beijing in 2008 and found, I think, 51 positives, and I think 11, is that the number? 11 or 14 are Russian athletes. And these athletes may be banned, and we'll have to see what the numbers are from the London Olympics. And, you know, the International Athletic Federation can choose to do the right thing. Travis Tygart, who's the head of U.S. anti-doping, who was the person who wrote the informed opinion that indicated Mr. Armstrong might have been doing something, and resulting in his disqualification. He's called, there are people calling for it, but it is a very obviously political situation. There are a lot of finance, telecast problems with this. In other words, they have all the evidence to do the right thing. It's whether or not, just as with this meeting in 1998 where they were supposedly going to appear to solve the drug problem, but the world showed up, and the rest of the world, I didn't bring up the fact that the White House showed up at this meeting in Switzerland when the first scandal came down, and independent ministers from around the world, health and sports ministers, showed up at the same meeting. It was parallel evolution. In other words, the time was right. The window was there. And it's a question here of whether or not this is truly one of those windows. And if it is, then it will come around to what I was saying about the USADA model's been there since 2000. In 2005, I sat at a table with Fear and Selig from baseball and the Players Union, along with Gary Bettman from hockey. And I was there representing U.S. anti-doping, saying, we're the model. I mean, you can do this way. We weren't arrogant about it. We were just saying, this seems to be effective. And this was early on. And, well, it was effective. In 2012, people finally started to realize it was infected, but they weren't interested. And by the way, I called them Felig. Sear and Felig, they were Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Felig 1 and Felig 2. And so there was that, and so it's a question of whether or not these entities want to give up, again, the conflict of interest and control over this testing, whether they really want to solve the problem. And Kenya, for years, went through the pretense of saying they were going to solve the problem and really doing nothing. Russia sort of went the other way and created a lab that was run by their version of the CIA, their national, agency, intelligence agency, was overseeing the program. It's interesting to me that the parallel between what went on in Russia in Sochi and what went on with the East Germans in 1976, having parallel labs and doing tests to make sure people can pass and changing stuff around. As the French say, plus ça change, plus il reste la même chose. The more it changes, the more it's the same. So the opportunity's there. It's just whether or not they have the courage to finally confront the problem. But this brings up my own personal theory. I think the beauty and the optimism here is social media. I think social media has taken away the ability of so many of these groups and organizations and federations who could control the narrative in the past. They can't control the narrative anymore. And so as more and more people are willing to come forward, whistleblowers who feel protected, Russia's in a problem now because one of their drug testing people married one of their best athletes, and they blew the whistle, and they're in danger. They're hiding, all right? But I think one of the reasons they had the courage, no, they always had the courage, but that they felt they could do it was that I think they felt a certain protection, you see, that they didn't in the past. So that's why I'm hoping that that whole, on the part of one group, realization that they can't control the narrative anymore will make them do something, make them do the right thing. I hope it made sense there. But I think we're on the verge. I really do. Because everybody got in trouble. I mean, I can go through the whole, and it's a wonderful narrative because, in the other way, because what happened is the Russian woman who got the bonus for winning Chicago, and Joni knows more about this than I do, and she won, I think, $500,000, and her federation extorted $450,000 of it to not publish her positive test. Then she got busted anyway, probably through social media, and she wanted her money back. Okay. And that sort of started the thing. And guess who then got involved? The head of IAAF was sucked in. The head of the IAAF drug testing lab, who was a Frenchman, got sucked in, and the whole thing, you see, started to go down. And so you hope that there's going to be more and more of that, you know? It's I don't know why I find that sort of humorous, but you know, it's the idea, because I do believe in the karma of it. I really do. I really do. I mean, you're talking to someone who waited 22 years, you know? And so I think there's a very good chance they're not going to be there. I really do. And my personal assessment is that Russia will go so that Kenya will be excluded, so Kenya can be included. I don't believe personally Kenya has any more right to be there than the Russians. They spent years stonewalling setting up their own drug testing lab, and finally enough people got into Kenya to test the Kenyan athletes. All the positives that have come up on Kenyan athletes, I don't think any of them have come from within the Kenyan system. They've come from outside. And I think it got to the point where the Kenyan Federation could no longer put those reports in the circular file at the end of the desk because of, again, social media, the idea that you just couldn't control it that much. But I believe Russia will not be there, in a sense, so Kenya can.
We have time for probably one more question.
Is that all?
It's a busy
I'll stay
afternoon.
after. No, really, I'll stay after if people want to get, because we're going to, the baccalaureate service isn't until 4:30, right? Okay. Okay.
So was the 76 winner of the marathon disqualified subsequently?
No, they, you know, it was interesting at this meeting in 1998. There was where Barry McCaffrey, President Clinton's drug czar, got up and told the IOC they were going to be out of the drug testing business, and the IOC executive board was probably thinking, oh, thank you very much, we hear what you're saying, we hear what you're saying, you know, that great act of listening. Okay, now we're going to go on and do whatever we want. They didn't understand they were dealing with the White House. And at that meeting, the Athletes Advisory Council of the IOC, which was made up of former Olympians, I was too old to be on that at that point, and I would never have been asked anyway. When it came time to create the delegation to go to this meeting, Barry McCaffrey said, well, why don't you go over to the IOC delegation? And I said, no, they don't want me. 2 weeks later, I get a call. Hi, it's Barry. I got someone here with me who wants to talk to you. It's Bill Hibble, head of the USOC. He said, hey, Frank, how would you like to be on our delegation? Okay. So, what was your question? No, what was your question? Oh, yeah, was the winner. Okay. No, because at that IOC meeting, what the committee also, this Athletes Advisory Committee, headed by Anita DeFrance, who was on the IOC executive board, addressed the convention and said, you know, the athletes have gotten together, and what they would like a one Olympiad statute of limitations on cheating, so that, you know, the athletes don't have to worry after about 4 years. And my thought as a lawyer was, this is one of the few organized entities on the planet that has a statute of limitations that tolls at the time of commission rather than discovery, right? Right? And it's presented to the entire group, right? And this is answering your question very circuitously as to why the IOC might have not wanted to do anything. I'm just giving you an example of how they think. And that was the advice I was really giving the White House when they were setting up USADA. I knew what was going on. I could tell them who the personalities were and everything else. And by the way, the one person that I told everybody who on the IOC we could possibly trust was Dick Pound. And guess what Dick Pound did? Dick Pound is the guy who just recently in the report said the Russians have got to go. Okay, all these years later, Dick Pound. And so there are some good people out there. I put myself on the agenda to address the executive committee in the general session, and I was going to defend, I had it all written out, defend the clean athletes with regard to this. I said, how can you do this, right? Essentially. They worked down all the countries to address. They passed me by. They missed me. Gee, what a mistake. And I just, you know, I guess my name doesn't ring a bell if I didn't think. And one of McCaffrey's assistants went up to the executive board and said, you gotta let him talk. So I did. But the point was, they were simply gonna ignore me, right? Because they knew what I was gonna say, right? So given that attitude in 1998, I'm not sure they would want to go back to 1976. What I have in my possession is this Dr. Franke. I met with him in Colorado Springs. I went down to meet with him, and I said, you know, what have you got? Because he was risking his life. They were going through all the old Stasi secret police files, because the Stasi, the secret police, was overseeing their drug program on a mandate from the president of the country, Honecker. It was right from the top. And they kept meticulous records. And guess what? On Hewlett-Packard reel-to-reel machines. And they like to think they were better record keepers than our CIA. But they also had written documents, and he came across some written documents that when they would discover them, they would actually review them with two people, with sequential stamps and initials to prove, you know, that the documents were real. I actually have a letter between two Stasi generals discussing their world record holder in the javelin, what drugs she's taking, and how they're going to get the drugs in West Germany and procure these other drugs for their athletes and the program. And attached to this memo to the file between these two major generals who were overseeing the program is a list of athletes, a code list with numbers on it. And Chabrinsky's name is one of the on the list, as are a lot of the swimmers and track and field athletes, and also, parenthetically, many of those track athletes are dead now. So, you know, there is that proof. So the proof exists if you wanna do it. But the current statute of limitations on all this now is 10 years, I think. I think that's what they've done. That's what they're willing to put up with. But again, just as with the roar and the finish, and it's a good way to end it, my true incentive to work for the creation of USADA and the work against all this use of drugs in sports is to make it so, it's very simple, you create a deterrent system so that our kids in the high school locker room, and in that 2005 testimony before Congress, I said, if all this talk about EPO and human growth hormone and now meldonium is making your eyes glaze over, just ask your teenage kids, they'll explain it to you. Because that's where I've always believed the young kids make the decision. And the kids who didn't make that decision, starting about 1976 until about 2000, will never know their names because they decided not to do it. Because I believe the decision to do it is made at that point. So I've never, ever held any stock in someone who says, oh, well, I got up here and I found out everybody was doing it, so gee, I had no choice, I had to do it. No, that decision was made very early on. So, you know, that's my incentive. And so that's why I'm doing it. And really, whether anything is done in any other area or for any other reason, really, honestly, is I won't say it's not that important to me, but it's not the primary reason I got into doing this. So with that, thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you, Frank. That was amazing. I just want to reiterate one point, the one at the end. In my prior incarnation, I did some research on Lance Armstrong, and I wrote cases when I was at the Harvard Business School on his cheating and on the other members of the team who were elite athletes who decided to cheat. And Taggart, the current head of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, the resistance that he faced in trying to bring the truth to light, and the extortive and threatening and bullying that goes on among the organized athletic organizations in that sport was unbelievable. And so the work that Frank has done and his successors, the hill that you had to climb to make a real difference in this is unbelievable. And
He first tried to bribe us in 2003. Yeah, he first tried in 2003, and Travis Tigert had just been hired as our in-house counsel. Like I said, you find good people and you keep them. I get goosebumps. You know, Terry Madden, who was the first CEO, and then Travis, who was our in-house counsel. Travis is the lawyer. He's new on the job. He gets this phone call. He goes, "What?" He walks into the next room. He says, "You'll never guess. This guy from Armstrong's group wants to donate $250,000 for some testing machine that we had." And Terry Madden, swear to God, looks up from what he's doing. He says, "We can't do that. It's a conflict of interest." And he goes back to what he's doing. Taggart walks back into the other room and says, "No, yeah."
Thank you, Frank. As Frank has pointed out, we have the baccalaureate ceremony at 4:30 in Watson. Darren Walker, one of our other honorands, will be speaking there, so it's a continuation of the great celebration. I hope you'll be able to join us there. And once again, Frank Shorter, thank you for being here.